I'm Ellen Southard. I run the Stormwater program for Seattle 2030 District, and actually have done a lot of work with the folks on this panel. I'm also honored to be on the Ecosystems Coordination Board with Puget Sound Partnership, which is how I met Larry Epstein, and have been in the trenches doing stormwater work for quite a few years with Jeremy Febus and Rachael Meyer. Jeremy's from KPFF, and Rachael is also with Weber Thompson, both principals at their firms. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to share the screen and share our PowerPoint with you and navigate that. So again, today's session is protecting Puget Sound and advancing the 2030 goals for our stormwater programs. So just a little bit of background about the Seattle 2030 District. Well, we have a network of 20 cities. I apologize, I forgot to update that. It's actually 24 cities, and we have 2 in Washington now that we have added the city of Bellevue. The 2030 District currently has 260 buildings committed to our program, which is 60 million square feet of commercial office space and housing in the downtown corridor of Seattle. And the goal of the 2030 District is to break down market barriers to building efficiency, make Seattle more sustainable and more climate resilient. And as you can see, this is our current geography, but we're starting to think about how our place in the watershed and getting beyond these district borders, especially where water is concerned. So we are in a watershed, and we have some extensive shoreline. Here we have Elliott Bay, South Lake Union, and of course the mouth of the Duwamish are all part of the district and part of the essential watershed that is in Puget Sound. And then we have some very substantial goals that our members have committed to, which is for existing architecture and structures, reducing energy by 50%, as well as for new construction, and the same with stormwater and potable water, and then reducing transportation impacts by 50% as well. So those are our core programs: energy, water, and transportation. And then we are a membership organization, but we also have tremendous supporters in the community, and just want to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors that help us make the year a robust year for performance. And then for the stormwater program itself, the current projects I'm working on include funding from King County and from Boeing. So thank you to all of our funders for making this work possible. So I just want to move ahead. Larry Epstein is the Deputy Director with the Puget Sound Partnership, and he's going to share some oversight of where we're at right now in the state of Puget Sound, and where there are opportunities for private landowners to advance Puget Sound recovery, while also committing to the Seattle 2030 District stormwater commitment. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Larry.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you to the 2030 District for inviting the partnership and welcoming me. I'm excited to kind of provide a little bit of overview to who we are and what we do, and how we, in the recovery plans that we advocate, connect and overlap with the District 2030's goals and aspirations. So, Ellen, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. So the Puget Sound Partnership, we're a state of Washington agency. And our statute calls for us to lead the regional recovery effort for Puget Sound. and the regional salmon recovery effort. We're also the Puget Sound National Estuary Program, which is under the Clean Water Act and funded through the Environmental Protection Agency. So we receive both state and federal funding to do our work of restoring Puget Sound, bringing back salmon, and central to that, ensuring that the federal efforts and state efforts are complying with and reaching to fulfill the tribal treaty rights that we as a nation and a state have committed to. Our statute calls for us to have these 5 desired outcomes. And core to this is protecting and improving water quality. But I do want to kind of emphasize that these address both kind of ecological aspects of living in Puget Sound, as well as the human well-being. And one of our goals that I'll touch on here and again over the next couple of minutes is to make sure we're also reaching for and meeting the aspirations of the state equity and environmental justice statute under the recently passed HEAL Act, as well as the federal Justice 40 effort, which the Biden administration has put forward and is advocating. So as we reach to achieve all of these desired outcomes, layering through each of these is the EEJ efforts that the state and the federal government are trying to make. Next slide, please. We too have some targets that we've set. These are found in the action agenda, which is the regional recovery plan for Puget Sound. And we are right now in the 2022-2026 action agenda, which sets a set of targets, strategies, and actions that we call upon the region and all aspects of the region to commit to and reach for in order to recover Puget Sound and the salmon that inhabit the area, as well as the health of the people who inhabit the area. And these targets and the plan that is meant to achieve them were developed in consultation with state agencies, with federal agencies, with tribes, as well as private citizens and the private sector who are involved in the partnership through our board system, through the public meetings that we've done, through the outreach that we've done. And I'll say that this action agenda, I think for the first time, makes a real concerted effort to really think about the role that private landowners play and the private sector plays in restoring Puget Sound. But I think it's just a beginning. I think that we have a lot of growth to do in the area of how we think about engaging the Puget Sound private sector, private landowner, urban core community. This action agenda takes a big leap forward towards that. And some of the other work that we're doing, which I'll touch on in a moment, does the same. But I think this is really just the start. And I know this program today is really focused on stormwater, but I want to say that the targets that the Leadership Council, the Puget Sound recovery community has set cannot be achieved without engaging private landowners, the private sector, and good management of stormwater. I mean, you see here, we have pretty ambitious targets for the health of eelgrass, shellfish beds, swimmable beaches, and on the next slide, please. The number of southern resident killer whales, our orcas, Chinook salmon, and toxics in aquatic life. These, without good management of stormwater across the entire Puget Sound region, and in particular our urban areas, we will not be able to achieve the goals that the Leadership Council, the governor's appointees, has committed us to. Next slide, please. So I won't go into each of these points in detail. I know there's a lot in here, but what I want to emphasize is in the recovery plan, we have strategies for stormwater runoff and legacy contamination, as well as healthy shorelines and nearshore area, which I'll get to in a moment, which really do point to the importance of urban areas and the private landowners and private sector entities that inhabit those land areas. Unlike more rural areas, where there's certainly a good amount of farming area, there's a lot of state and federal ownership, county ownership of those lands. There is a real distinct set of strategies that we advocate in those kind of more rural areas that are a little bit distinct from what we've been thinking about is necessary for the urban kind of built up, industrialized areas where there's a lot more private land ownership, and that land ownership is dispersed amongst a lot more private landowners and private entities. So this stormwater runoff and legacy contamination list of strategies is really geared towards thinking about what are the incentives the state can advocate, and what are the barriers, whether it's in terms of acquiring funding or it's in terms of easing the aspect of permitting. What can we do to work with private landowners or private sector who really want to do the right thing by managing stormwater runoff and legacy contamination in a way that is constructive to improving water quality? And the next slide, please. And some of the initiatives that come out of the action agenda, as well as the stormwater implementation strategy, really kind of can be wrapped up into these. We really think it's important that we reduce the barriers to infilling and redevelopment in high growth areas such as city centers and urban growth areas, and do so in a way that's low impact development, especially within those urban growth areas. I think what we've heard from developers and investors participating in redevelopment is that when they want to do the right thing, that kind of low impact development, they're still faced with a lot of kind of planning and regulatory challenges for doing that. And we think there are ways that the recovery community, the government can help improve the predictability and even ease some of the permitting issues that the private sector faces as they're trying to put in place salmon-friendly, clean water-friendly infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then we want to kind of invest in, specific programs where things like tradable development rights, other market-based mechanisms, where collaboration between kind of urban areas and more rural, undeveloped areas can achieve goals at a watershed scale. As Ellen said, the city of Seattle downtown core is in a really important watershed. And that watershed extends all the way up to the crest of the Cascades, through farmland, through tribal lands. And there's a lot of opportunities that King County has already tapped into to think about tradable development rights. But I think we need to be able to help our partners across the region scale that up for the entire Puget Sound Basin. Next slide, please. And I won't kind of go into this in a lot of detail, but stormwater is not the only area where we're really paying attention to and focusing on the opportunity to work with private landowners, private sector in developed urban areas. Healthy shorelines is a key part of that as well. The city of Seattle, King County, and I would say the entire coastal plain is an urbanized or increasingly urbanized area. And those shorelines are critical for ecological functioning, for salmon, for swimmable beaches where people like to go out into the water and play. And by engaging, or I said without engaging the private sector and private landowners, those shorelines are increasingly becoming hardened and less able to perform their ecological function. So one of our key goals is trying to think about how do we engage with the landowners on those shorelines to do kind of voluntary work through incentives, through easements, to ensure that the property that they own on those shorelines is functioning, as an ecologically sensitive and ecologically productive area. And if we can go on to the next. So we've included these strategies in the recovery plan. We're also building a team within the Puget Sound Partnership that is really focused on how do we engage with local partners, whether it's public entities or private entities, to help them access the resources and help them remove the barriers that they face to putting in place Puget Sound friendly infrastructure. And this is a team within the partnership that is really going to be outward focused to help these local partners, whether they're public or private, access some of the huge amount of funding that is now available through federal and state programs to do this kind of work, to have healthy stormwater and living shorelines. And that's really working with state and federal partners to develop grant programs that are directed towards working with our local partners, federal, state, local, private and public, to do that work. It's really helping them access some of the funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really geared towards providing resources for private sector partners to do that work, supporting the grant application processes from those local partners, and really kind of advocating how those resources can really align with local priorities and the lines of work that whether it's private or public partners locally want to do. Next slide, please.
Here we go.
So one of the things that we've already put up is a web resources. So interested parties can match the types of projects that they're interested in putting in place with the grant opportunities or other incentives such as easement opportunities that are out there. This is actually now a dated screenshot. We have a new and much more user-friendly web interface out there, and I'll have to send that out after this meeting. Next slide, please. And that same team is also going to help kind of address some of the barriers that our partners face, regulatory, permitting, and how do we ease the efforts that these local partners are trying to make by reducing some of those regulatory barriers. And that especially is kind of focused on permitting and grant complexity. Next slide, please. And finally, we've launched, not just in the partnership, but across the state system, places where there's a lot of innovation happening that is meant to draw in and engage the private sector who wants to work in shoreline and water quality. So one is the Salish Sea Nearshore Marketplace, which we've developed with NOAA. And that's really focused on creating a compliance marketplace, a offset marketplace for creosote removal, which probably a lot of you know is a chemical that negatively affects the well-being of water quality, as well as herring. And that's really kind of focused on for people and private sector folks who are doing overwater development and need to comply with ESA and Clean Water Act requirements, developing a marketplace where they can offset their impact by purchasing credits that remove creosote and other overwater structures. Right now, that is focused on that creosote removal effort, but it's going to be expanding to shoreline habitat in 2024. Providing a kind of easily accessible marketplace for those private landowners and private marinas who are developing overwater structures to help them comply with the Clean Water Act and ESA. And we're also starting to work on efforts to attract private impact investment capital for restoration on private landowners, specifically riparian areas, farm areas, and potentially other landscapes. Who are really looking for partnerships with the private sector rather than working with the state and trying to attract private impact investment for restoration on their farm property. And there's also the Washington Stormwater Center, which is not us, that's the Department of Ecology, who do a lot of great work in this space, creating innovative programs to help private landowners, private sector with stormwater management. And that's the crux of my presentation. I want to say kind of through these efforts, through your efforts like 2030, we track our indicators for Puget Sound recovery pretty closely. And I'll say that we still have a lot of work to do, but there are some that are getting better. And I'm sorry, you're right. It's at WSU Puyallup, not ecology. I'm very sorry. I don't know why my notes are off on that. The indicators we're seeing say that we still have a lot of work to do. But there's also some things that are improving and getting better. And I'd say without these efforts that we're making through public-private partnerships, through engagement with you,
Jesus Christ, that asshole.
they'd be getting a heck of a lot worse. They'd be getting a heck of a lot worse. So I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture, but I want to kind of congratulate all of you on the work that you do, and the fact that we are seeing some improvements despite the worsening effects of climate change, despite the large increase of population that's come into the Puget Sound area over the last couple decades. So thank you for the time that you've given me here, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Larry. And it was great to have that overview from you. And you know, one thing, since one of the last things Larry discussed was creosote, something to remember where the 2030 district is concerned is when the seawall was rebuilt. The surfaces of that wall were not just built for salmon and for marine habitat, but the creosote pilings from the piers were primarily removed, or at least the damaged ones. So we have seen some incredible response. UW's been studying what's happened along the seawall as well as at the Olympic Sculpture Park. So there is healthy salmon habitat and salmon recovery happening right in the district, right here in the city. And we've seen the coho populations come back at Olympic Sculpture Park. So there's a lot to be hopeful for. So thanks, Larry, for that. And we're going to turn.
Can I get through here?
Can I ask folks to mute themselves, please, if you could? And then we're going to move on and have Rachel and Jeremy take the stage now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ellen. Yes, I'm Rachael Meyer, Principal of Landscape Architecture with Weber Thompson. And we're going to share with you the Aurora Bridge swales today that we've collaborated with Jeremy at KPFF, Ellen, and Salmon Safe, and with a lot of support from Boeing and a lot of the folks probably on this call. It took a really group effort, and Brian Mickelson is definitely an important person on this call who made a lot of things happen. So next slide. Here we go. This is just an overview of the projects. We've completed 3 phases, and the first 2 are associated with commercial office developments as part of their frontage improvements that were facing the Aurora Bridge. So phase 1 and phase 2 were part of Data 1 and Watershed, and phase 3 is just down the hill adjacent to the Burke-Gilman Trail. Next slide. We can't really talk about this without talking about Jen McIntyre and her research. This was a major inspiration to our team and our client, Mark Gray, who, as we were starting the first of these commercial projects, saw her research where she showed that soil could be an effective filter for stormwater to take the lethal effects of chemicals in the water away. And, you know, just to note, when we started this, we really didn't know why stormwater was killing salmon. And that has come full circle, that we'll note on at the end. And yes, Heidi, Jen is part of the Washington Stormwater Center and all that good work. So it's pretty awesome to have a local research team that we could take inspiration from. Next slide. This is just kind of a graphic we've made to help represent kind of the historic nature of the sound and you know, our salmon swimming routes are all under a number of bridges that were built almost 100 years ago. And the effects of those vehicle and aquatic pathways is really potent. So we're talking about the yellow arrow, the Aurora Bridge, built in 1932, which was also the first bridge in the country built solely for cars. Next slide. And this just gives kind of a gut check on, how far salmon travel into the Puget Sound, and how the route through the ship canal really is this gauntlet that they have to traverse to get very deep into the lakes and rivers within our region. And so a focus on this gauntlet that comes with a lot of pollution and outfalls that are pretty toxic to these fish is so important. Next slide. I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy to talk about a little more detail.
Thanks, Rachel. It's Jeremy Febus. I'm a partner and a civil engineer at KPFF, and like has been mentioned, I have the great pleasure of working with a number of the people here on some pretty impactful and neat stuff. So part of the study and research that we were doing together with Ellen and Rachel and others here along the ship canal was we just became aware of the extent to which these untreated outfalls, first from the bridges, were going directly into this waterway that was the pinch point for this whole salmon migration route. The circles you see represented here kind of represent graphically the volume of untreated stormwater from each of those bridges crossing the ship canal. We're going to talk a lot about the Aurora Bridge at 4 million gallons a year, but you can see there's almost 100 million gallons a year coming off of the ship canal bridge in direct discharges right now. If we go to the next slide, and then combine that with the just untreated urban stormwater, and fact that in our very beautiful and progressive and green city that we still have massive areas of untreated urban runoff that goes directly into this critical waterway. It's a if we combine those two and look at the next slide. So in our region, like we've spent a lot of time, and there's been a lot of press coverage when there is any about stormwater, about combined sewer overflows, which is great. That needs to be fixed. It needs lots of intention and investment. But we don't talk very much about urban stormwater runoff, and I think my impression is that a lot of folks, my family and neighbors and friends, like seawater as it's clean. It falls from the sky, and it isn't as intuitive how foul it can be by the time it gets to the waterways, the same way that a combined sewer overflow is sort of is intuitively a bad thing. The picture here, we sometimes affectionately refer to it as the hand in the pink glove, is actually what stormwater looks like coming off of the Aurora Bridge at one of the last downspouts here. And the data here was collected by Salmon Safe under Ellen's supervision here, where we Salmon Safe's biologists went out and tested the Aurora Bridge water quality, and then benchmarked it against other regional and national metrics, and found that it was worse than any of the benchmarks that we could look at, and actually the worst that he had seen on any of his collections. It isn't just, this isn't by any means just unique to the Aurora Bridge. If going back to those over all bridge discharges that we were talking about, or even the urban street runoff, you can go stand out. Any of you, the next rainfall event, go stand out on the bulkhead at the North Passage Park underneath the I-5 bridge, and you will see a gray and black plume fanning out many meters into this pinch point of the ship canal bridge right there. You just have to be aware of where these outfalls are, and you can see for yourself kind of what we have to work with, what we have to work on here. Next slide. So getting to solutions, I'll hand it back here to Rachel, and we'll tag team.
Awesome. So, the Aurora Bridge swales is kind of this success story in kind of many milestones over the years. So data one, phase one, on the far left was our first phase. That section tackles one downspout, which is about 200,000 gallons of stormwater a year. In the middle is Watershed. That has two downspouts being routed to swales, as well as alley runoff. There's also a number of building stormwater systems we'll talk about. And then phase three on the far right is downhill. That system is designed to take 5 downspouts. It has 3 currently going in, and re-piping 2 of those downspouts became prohibitive through the phases, but it just kind of goes to show how complicated each of these phases is. So we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide.
And each of these, an important point I think for 2030 district members is those first 2 phases were 100% like private funded. Like those were entirely facilitated by the adjacent developments with help from obviously the design team, but with experts like Salmon Safe here. And then only the 3rd phase for the first time introduced state dollars that Ellen helped secure. And then the 4th phase that we'll talk about kind of goes back to sort of a public-private partnership together.
Yeah, this first phase, was prior to the code change that required on-site stormwater mitigation. So, at this point, we were really just told we could not do this, that we couldn't take bridge water and bring it onto the public right-of-way to clean it. And so the real victory was in navigating just that initial question of, is this okay? And how can we get it through a permitting process? So a lot of discussion with all the different agencies, the state owning the bridge, the city of Seattle having jurisdiction in the roadway, Seattle Public Utilities having jurisdiction once it's in pipes underground, and then Department of Ecology as it approaches the shoreline and outfalls downstream. Next slide. And by the time we got to phase 2, that basically kind of permission and negotiation of a maintenance agreement between the private landowner and the utility had been forged. And so it became really about, okay, how can we start to scale this up and provide as much benefit as possible. On Watershed, the developer really wanted to see the opportunities of integrating building water as well. And so it integrates a roof collection and flushes toilets with the water that is falling on the roof. Next slide. This is Watershed, aptly named for all the things that it does, but it has very ambitious energy, material, and water goals, and is part of the Living Building pilot program, collecting the water off the roof into a 20,000 gallon cistern that's below the building, celebrating kind of all those processes through a design that reveals the structure and kind of the uses in the building. And then kind of through this large gate that you can see on the right, the shared lobby is an open air space that helps conserve energy and tie people in with the community that is the building, and also the elements, which is really a great expression of kind of low impact design. Next slide. The building really tries to showcase these strategies. We have a reduction of potable water use that is 75% from a baseline. We achieve that primarily through flushing toilets in the building, and also irrigating with non-potable water. The building is required to reuse half of the water that falls on the site, which really proved to be a very difficult challenge. But we're doing that. The only real way to optimize stormwater reuse is to flush it in the toilet of the building, and it ends up saving about 200,000 gallons, almost the same amount of water coming down one of the downspouts inside the building. The occupied roofs can't be salvaged. The water can't be routed to the cistern because of health code requirements. So this project also discharges that into an evaporation swale, which you can see just at the base of this kind of stair platform. And through sort of a biomimicry design process, we work to boost the amount of evaporation that could happen on the site as another strategy to reduce the amount of water that would be leaving the site. We also have a ton of other goals, one of which is supporting pollinators and connecting building users with urban agriculture. And so we have 4 beehives on the roof, which we've just tasted the first harvested honey recently, and it's amazing. But we've really tried to integrate pollinating, plants that support pollinators in all 3 phases. Next slide. Jeremy, do you want to talk about
I
this?
think that, and I think there are a couple of important points here, I think, for 2030 district members. One is that a lot of people would look at Watershed and Data One as an overly constrained site, like especially with the topography, the bridge columns, and say that, and sort of, and under SPUs and SDCIs, feasibility criteria, you could easily dismiss doing anything out here. But through the design and development process, like I think we actually found ways that the topography worked for us and enhanced the treatment of the system by recirculating through, not just kind of percolating through one cell and then moving on, but actually percolating over and over again, which had an aesthetic value also, and water quality value, because you could kind of made the water more visible in the system. And then Rachel's made these look beautiful, but when you can actually look below the surface and see that it's pipe and dirt like below the surface, then the developers and understand that and can put cost to that and see that it isn't it isn't as it's an achievable goal.
Yeah. I've been given the 2-minute warning, so we're going to go through this last phase so we can get to phase 4. So phase 3, we talked about at the bottom of the hill. It has a settlement area, and that was really a reflection that there's a lot of sediment that needs to be removed from these swales. So the design has evolved through this. At this point at phase 3 in 2020 was when Jen's team, along with another chemistry department at the University of Washington, identified that it was tire dust that included the ingredient that was ultimately causing deaths in juvenile salmon. And kind of knowing that, it makes it all the more kind of potent. The coffee look of the water coming out really is about that tire dust and what is in the water. Next slide. Another view of the swale. Next slide. And and there's Jen with the research team that identified that. So Google that story if you haven't seen it. It's pretty powerful. Next slide. But we do want to touch on this last project, which we've been referring to as kind of the 4th phase, and that is North Lake Commons. It's a 200,000 square foot lab ready timber office building. It's a project with the Dunn Lumber family, who have owned this property, and this is their family's lumber mill, dating back to Seattle early settlers. This project has really proven that you don't have to be next to a bridge in order to tackle these types of issues. And Jeremy will touch on the next slide that we tap into a stormwater line in Latona. So go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, so we showed some maps earlier representing that there are significant areas of urban stormwater, untreated urban stormwater being discharged to our area waterways. And so the bridges are sort of more intuitive, but when you're looking at the potential on a site or a potential development or reuse on a site, and if you step back and look at that context, then you can see things like this Latona Avenue main line that's collecting a pretty substantial basin going untreated into the ship canal. And so this developer and the design team have evolved. This is phase 4 now, and are much more sophisticated and understanding what we're tackling than we were on phase 1. And then at the same time, SPU and SDCI have been on a journey with us, and Brian's on here, and their approaches and tools have evolved. And so on this one, instead of SPU as just a permitting authority, they have really been a partner on this. So the developer is providing the land, is managing all of the design and construction and permitting, and SPU is utilizing program resources available to provide a monetary incentives to the developer for repair of what are arguably kind of I don't know, I don't want to make Brian cringe here, but a non-compliant kind of discharge system that SPU will probably have to fix at some point. And so having developers that are willing to kind of be creative and implement solutions, near-term benefit to the public for sure, but long-term benefit to the utility in removing liability for their system.
Next slide.
And this is really kind of capturing all of that in a bigger picture. You could see in blue the basin going to the direct discharge, and then in red the area that's being captured and mitigated by this project.
Awesome. These are a couple graphics that that we borrowed from Brian and his team that really show how the city is trying to mobilize efforts on many different fronts to help tackle this issue. And that, you know, in 2000, or even as you can see, 2012, the amount of stormwater that private and public efforts were cleaning was relatively modest, and within the last few decades has really started to scale up in size and impact, with a goal of reaching 700 million gallons of stormwater mitigation each year by 2025. And it does look like we are close to meeting that effort, but only with partnerships between private and public agencies. Next slide. And, you know, the details aren't as important as, you know, these colors represent opportunities on both the public right-of-way and private parcels where green stormwater infrastructure is being incentivized by either the city or the county, and that incentive is available through many different programs for private developers to partner with different agencies. Next slide. That's it.
Thank you all so much. That was great. I really appreciate your insights on all of this. So I'm going to do a rapid fire here because we're going to start to run out of time, and we do want to leave a couple minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to move quickly through one of our new initiatives, and that is the Watershed Investment Fund. This happens to be a postcard that some of you might receive in the next few weeks that we'll be mailing out. But how does your building impact Puget Sound? So what we're really trying to do is create some solutions here for folks who are not building new and who maybe don't have any space within their site to address on-site stormwater treatment. If you think about the Seattle 2030 district and the typology of buildings that we have within the district, and if you think about it throughout the course of other communities in Puget Sound, we've got a lot of zero lot line development. So this happens to be an image of Pioneer Square, but we have a substantial amount of unreinforced masonry buildings that were built to their site edge. And how do we get landowners to help meet this 2030 challenge and participate in Puget Sound recovery? And so that is what the Watershed Investment Fund is going to do. It's going to help create a framework for landowners and or tenants in the downtown area or a part of the 2030 district to meet the challenge by investing in the Watershed Investment Fund. And one of the things I want to point out where in terms of the geography of the 2030 district, we are actually located in two watersheds. Excuse me, I'll go back up. So we're located in what's called Watershed Region 8 and Region 9. So 8 is south of Belltown and 9 is north of Belltown. With the Watershed Investment Fund, we have two partners that have joined us, Mid-Sound Fisheries Enhancement Group and the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Mid-Sound Fisheries Enhancement Group does a lot of work in terms of restoration, both rural and urban. And then, of course, the Duwamish River Community Coalition is a coalition of folks that are involved with the Superfund cleanup in the Duwamish. And they do some incredible work in terms of supporting the underserved populations that are in and along the Duwamish and in South Seattle. Oops. I guess I got my slides out of order. I apologize, but this is a peek at what those watershed maps look like. And if you look at this line, this line that divides Rye 8 and Rye 9 happens to go right through downtown, and that's what divides the 2030 district. By the way, RIA stands for Watershed Resource Investment Area, or Inventory Area, excuse me. So in terms of the Watershed Investment Fund, you will have choices in terms of the projects that you could help support. Some will be in Beaver Creek. And if you think about that map that Rachel showed, our salmon have a very complicated migration corridor to go through the urban areas and to make their way back to spaces like this that you see here that are suitable for spawning. And we're starting to see less and less land area like this as we start to grow exponentially in our region. Bear Creek happens to be a successful area for spawning and still has a healthy salmon population. And so our goal is to help reinforce getting the salmon there and making sure that they have reasonable habitat. So some of the things we might look at if we're making investment in Bear Creek, will be investing in restoration projects that enhance water quality, but also looking at potentially at deep paving projects and green stormwater infrastructure installations. And then in the Duwamish, in the South Park, Georgetown areas, we'll be investing in green stormwater infrastructure that supports placemaking, like the places you saw today under the Aurora Bridge, but also are helping to address water quality, mitigate the stormwater impacts, and help recover salmon populations and other marine habitats. So that's where the investments will be made. One thing I want to point out too, in terms of environmental and social justice, is I happen to live just a few blocks from the bioswales at the Aurora Bridge, and our life expectancy in the Fremont-Wallingford neighborhood is 13 years longer than that in the Duwamish area in South Park and Georgetown. So there's definitely a link here in terms of human health and, again, supporting underserved populations, but also thinking about the cultural identity of the Duwamish. Larry mentioned tribal treaty rights. Anytime we can improve salmon populations, we are working towards meeting some of the goals of the tribal treaty rights. It's also an area of very diverse population of people from around the globe who really depend on fish as part of their cultural identity and diets. And so it's very important that we think about the interconnectedness, of course, of clean water with our food systems, as well as our economy. So how are we going to figure this out? This is actually a tool that we developed, and KPFF did some peer review on this for us. But we are looking at a tool where we can calculate what the stormwater value is at a property that does not have the ability to do on-site infiltration. And again, we're talking about places like Belltown and Pioneer Square, where projects have been built to different lot, to the edge of the lot line. They're unreinforced masonry buildings, and so therefore they don't have the structural capacity for a green roof or a cistern. And they may have all kinds of challenges when it comes to SDOT and or underground infrastructure. So there's no opportunity for on-site infiltration. And so the things we're looking at is calculating the roof runoff, which is actually how your utility bill is calculated. And then we're also starting to look at pollutants, pollutant loads and things that we're diverting when we can treat stormwater through green stormwater infrastructure. So this is just a sample of some of the things we're looking at in terms of how to calculate the value. And in this case too, just to mention, in the downtown corridor, we actually did a calculation of a tenant who has a keen interest in water quality and wants to support the district. So they have interest in water quality, they have interest in salmon recovery. So this doesn't have to be just for landowners. This can be really a corporate social responsibility contribution as well, if folks want to participate in the program. So the Watershed Investment Fund, really, it's a burgeoning market. We've seen a lot of success when it comes to carbon markets. We also see a lot of challenges when it comes to carbon markets in terms of transparency. So I do want to identify that the 2030 district will be bringing on a third-party verifier for this work. This is not mitigation. And when I say that, I say that because many times in terms of land use, mitigation has meant doing harm in one place and then restoring another, especially when you think about wetland mitigation. That is not what this is. This fund is for landowners, tenants, people who care about Puget Sound recovery, that want to address what their stormwater impact is and find an opportunity to treat those stormwater impacts in places where there's great need. But it is not a mitigation project in the sense that that's a hall pass. So if you are a 2030 district member, if you're a landowner and you're building a new project or doing a retrofit at a site where you can do stormwater treatment on site, that is still the goal of the 2030 district. This is really just an opportunity for parties that do not have land typology that can treat stormwater on site to address what those stormwater impacts are from their building elsewhere where there's a greater need. And again, I mentioned corporate social responsibility. This is a great opportunity to think about where you invest your corporate funds and your social funds for environmental concerns. So with that, I want to thank you all, and we still have 2 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to stop share so we can see people's faces and engage. Feel free to turn your video back on and welcome any questions that folks have for us today. Oh, thank you for the accolades, Heidi. We appreciate that. I want to welcome questions if anyone has some.
Ellen, thank you all so much. I'm wondering about follow-up because there are a lot of other people who probably really should know about this work and would be very interested. You know, eventually we'll be running a workshop on an innovative stormwater fund based on Measure W in LA County, but this kind of work would be like a perfect dovetailing. And so this has so much energy and promise, and I really like the private sector connection. So I was just wondering if you had all thought about how to push forward and sort of create a community of practice out of this that kind of grows from your shared work.
Oh, well, that's a great question. I'll let everybody answer that question. I think, well, first of all, if you'd like to invite us to do another panel, we're happy to do so.
That'd be great.
Yeah. And I think, you know, our team has been very, very active, at least the bridge team, in giving tours and giving talks. And so that will continue. And then Larry and I are actually working on a committee that is a subcommittee of the Ecosystems Coordination Board on how to engage private sector landowners. So I'll let Larry say a little bit more about that.
It's great. Make sure you let Catherine Gokul know, because she's always looking for success stories, and you know, because they spend more money in this estuary than any other place in the US. So they're always under pressure to provide evidence of return on investment. So understandable. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen.
Larry, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, sure. I think you picked up on one of those kind of great resources, that subcommittee, which is part of the board that you serve on, that the Stormwater SIL serves on, the Ecosystem Coordination Board. There's just a great cross section of local government, academic, private sector individuals represented on that board, state government as well, where a lot of innovation is generating from, both on the board and on the subcommittee. And it's a space where, I work in the state. There's a lot of focus on regulation, public funding, but there's so much kind of creativity happening out there. This Stormwater Fund, which I'm just learning about, sounds like a fantastic opportunity. The work, Ellen, that you're doing on this subcommittee, where we're really thinking about what can we do outside of the kind of regulatory structures, grant structures that we've become accustomed to, is a great place where the innovation happens, and really looking forward to more participation in that. You mentioned Catherine. I don't want to completely kind of sideline our federal partners who are, in the recently passed Puget SOS Act. It codifies into statute the Puget Sound Federal Task Force, and within that there is a subcommittee focused on funding. Which is another space where we're starting to think about creatively about how do we engage the private sector. And they're the ones that are providing the resources for us, the Puget Sound Partnership, to work on some of these ideas, like how do we get private sector impact investment to enter into the system. So I want to kind of give that some recognition and credit as well.
Great, and I'm seeing a note from Ella Sandquist from Salmon Safe that she is happy to support the subcommittee. Thanks, Ella.
Thank you.
Is there any questions, any technical questions or policy questions folks might have?
Yeah, we should meet again. We could talk. Unfortunately, I've got another staff meeting. I have one of those stupid days of back to back. I'm just like, oh my God. This was fantastic. A nice way to start the day too. It's really beautiful. Nice to see Rachel. I haven't seen Rachel in a long time, since we had like wine and arancini balls at Sartoro's up on Greenwood. It was very memorable. I talk about it all the time. That's the last time physically. That Salmon Safe tour also, do you remember that? That was fantastic. Like 2018 maybe, where we went on the bus, remember?
Yeah, we're trying to fund the bus tour again. So that's, Ella and I have been working on that, and so I'll keep you posted, but we are trying to fund the urban rural watershed tours again with Salmon Safe. I just want to thank everybody. Unless there's more questions, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I do, just want to end that this is a remarkable place where we live. And I once lived in another remarkable place outside of Chesapeake Bay, which has a highly organized community and some comparable organizations to Puget Sound Partnership. And in my adult life, I have seen more dolphins and more sea life now than I did in my youth. So I leave you with that sense of hope that we are the second largest, Chesapeake Bay is the first largest estuary, we're the second largest estuary. And I think,
Larry, I
think we can all agree that if we work together, there's a lot of opportunities for water quality here, preserving our way of life, and recovering Puget Sound. So with that, I thank you all. Thanks for being here, and
excellent.
Let me know how we can partner with your organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone. Bye.